Closed captioning of this program is made possible by the Fireman's Fund Foundation.
Secretary of State Hillary Clinton is in San Francisco tonight as top-level Democrats and Republicans visit the Bay Area in the final 2 weeks of the midterm elections. We'll look at Proposition 22, which would protect local funds from raids by the state, and Proposition 24, which has attracted some of the heaviest campaign contributions and would repeal a recent tax law that has saved businesses money. A federal judge says that the don't ask, don't tell policy on gays in the military is unconstitutional. The Obama administration is asking the judge to delay implementation. And a Climate Watch conversation with the man in charge of renewable energy policies for the World Bank. We'll have those stories next. Good evening and welcome to This Week in Northern California. I'm Belva Davis. Joining me tonight on our news panel are Matthew Bajeko, Assistant Editor for the Bay Area Reporter, Marisa Lagos, Sacramento reporter with the San Francisco Chronicle, and Randy Shandeville, Political Editor for KTVU Channel 2 News. And we will start with you, Randy. We just mentioned that Secretary Clinton is in town. Her husband will be here on the weekend. Sarah Palin has been here. The Obamas, both of them will be here before the month's out. Do we expect big name endorsements to have an impact in this election?
Well, it depends what you mean by impact. If you mean by impact, will they change any minds? Almost certainly not. It's hard to imagine Republicans or independents deciding, wow, Bill Clinton's here, Barack Obama's here, I'm going to change my mind and vote for Jerry Brown or Barbara Boxer. What they are hoping to do is motivate the base. There is a concern this year amongst Democrats that there is an enthusiasm gap, that they're not as excited about coming out to vote as Republicans are. So the big names on the Democratic side are here to kind of prod Democrats, show up on Election Day, please. That's what they're here for. Sarah Palin, on the other hand, neither Meg Whitman nor Carly Fiorina wanted to appear with her, and that's because Sarah Palin is very popular with the Republican base, but not so much with independents. So the Republican base is going to vote for Whitman and Fiorina anyway. They're concerned about the independents.
So is it your sense that Palin was here more for herself? Is she setting herself up for 2012? I mean, to have several events and have none of the Republican candidates who are locked in tight races appear there, it seems sort of interesting.
Well, Sarah Palin can still help Whitman and Fiorina, not necessarily, she doesn't necessarily have to be with them. She could remind Republicans, boy, it's really important to vote for Carly Fiorina because there's all these things about Barbara Boxer that Republicans don't like. And even though they're not appearing together, she could still motivate them. But as for her personal ambitions, I don't know if there's a hidden agenda there or not.
There are rumors that Sarah Palin only appears where she is being paid to be there, that she charges a fee for appearances. Is that true? That's on the blogs. One never knows.
I've heard that certainly most of the time she gets paid. Whether that's true all of the time, I don't want to say because I don't know.
Sure.
So do we know if the president's message is hitting home with Democrats here in the Bay Area, and are they actually going to go out and vote in a couple weeks?
That's a good question. I don't know. I can tell you anecdotally, and I realize we're all wary of that term anecdotally, but when I talk to people on the streets, when I talk to Democrats on the streets, and there are mainly Democrats here in the Bay Area, they aren't excited. You don't find many Democrats who say, boy, I'm really excited about voting for Jerry Brown. They plan to vote for Jerry Brown if they vote. And much the same thing about Barbara Boxer. They're not as excited as Republicans are. So that's the point of these visits, to kind of, ring an alarm bell. Be excited, care.
And we're almost, 2 weeks out on Tuesday. I mean, how's it looking for the Republican candidates, for the Democratic candidates? It seems like both Senate governor races are pretty tight still. Is there anything in the last few weeks that you think have really changed the dynamic?
Both races are still tight, but in recent weeks, Barbara Boxer has been opening up a small lead over Carly Fiorina. And the same in the governor's race. Jerry Brown has opened up a lead over Meg Whitman. And what's interesting in that is that there's a new poll out today after this recent debate where a lot of people thought Meg Whitman did pretty well. This new Rasmussen poll, which again, many people say leans Republican, actually show Brown with his biggest lead so far in the race, 6 points. And also interesting, 12 points amongst women. He has a 12-point lead amongst women. And there was some thinking that because of that remark that was caught on his phone answering machine, the horror remark, that he might suffer an hemorrhage amongst women. And at least so far, according to Rasmussen, that hasn't manifested itself.
We've had 2 October surprises, as they like to call them, in the governor's race. I don't think I've seen anything yet in the Senate race. Are we expecting there's going to be some major scandal to hit in the next 2 weeks?
Well, I haven't heard of any, but I wouldn't be surprised if one happens. One thing they have to keep in mind, if one camp or the other is planning a late October surprise, there's diminishing returns, because the longer you wait, the more people have already voted. There's early voting. People are voting as we speak. Vote by mail, have been for, a week and a half now?
Yeah.
And so if they wait too long, there's fewer voters to influence. If they do it too early, then the other side has time to rebut it and knock it down. So they want to wait till close so that they can't fact check it, so to speak. But they don't want to go too late when there's no one left undecided.
We talk so much about the horse race. In the debates, have you sensed that candidates have really talked about issues at all?
Yes, but they haven't really varied from what they said 6-10 months ago. They have been talking about the issues, but as we know, Meg Whitman is a very scripted candidate. And what she's saying in the debates, when she's asked a question, she's almost answering from a speech line. She's laying out her positions, but she's not giving any new ground. She's not adding to what she said a long while ago. Jerry Brown, on the other hand, from the beginning, has been more vague and less detailed than Whitman. But he's been talking about that, yes, I'm more frugal than you think. I haven't raised taxes. I'm a Democrat. No, I'm not beholden to the unions. And he has been talking about issues. And again, the interesting thing with Brown is he's kind of the opposite of Whitman. He's so self-confident and he's so sharp and witty that he ad-libs. And that's refreshing to reporters because they like to hear real answers rather than something from their internal hard drive, the candidate's internal hard drive. He doesn't punch a button, he actually answers, but sometimes it gets him in trouble because he makes mistakes.
Right. Well, it's almost non-news, but I understand Meg Whitman has put more money into the campaign.
$20 million, $20 million more she put in Tuesday as that last debate was starting. That puts her up to, I think it's $141 million. And that's by far the most of any candidate in California history.
Wow.
Well, we've turned now to the propositions. They used to not be places where there was tons of money, but you've got at least one that quite a bit of money has been put into. We're talking about Proposition 22 and 24 tonight.
Right, and we'll get to the money in a second, but not nearly as much as Whitman, we'll say that. Prop 22 to begin with, this is a measure that was put on by local transit agencies, redevelopment agencies, counties, and basically what it would do is we would wall off transit, transportation, and redevelopment money. So the state can't go in for these funds that have really been earmarked for those purposes by voters or the legislature in the past and take them away from locals to kind of fill the budget holes we've seen a lot in recent years. It's an interesting one because it's really pitting groups that tend to line up together against one another. On one side, you have these transit agencies, county governments. On the other hand, you have sort of some cities, although they've been staying out of it, but the teachers associations, the smaller firefighters groups, not the kind of folks that run the departments, but the rank and file. And what they're saying is, look, anytime you do this type of thing, it means that when we have another deficit, we're not going to have an option at the state level to kind of jigger things around. And so it's really set up an interesting thing now, whether voters are going to be able to kind of cut through all that. We'll see. The second one is Prop 24, which would roll back 3 tax breaks for businesses that were approved during the 2009 budget negotiations. This is a sort of typical unions and Democrats on one side, businesses and Republicans on the other. And we're talking about $1.3 billion in tax breaks every year. So what businesses say is that's $1.3 billion we could keep hiring folks, keeping businesses in the state. On the other side, you have all these unions saying, well, that's $1.3 billion we could be using to hire teachers and cops. So again, sort of, that's the one where we have a lot of money. The Teachers Association has poured $6.5 million into the pro side to repeal these breaks. That's raised about $11 million total. On the other side, you have these individual businesses, Cisco's, Disney, General Electric, really big names who have each poured, $100,000 here, $100,000 there. So
these are 2 measures that probably people will look into their voter handbook and say, tell me more about this, because there's so much more to tell because of the technical language that's in the voter's handbook.
That's right. I mean, they are very complicated and sort of confusing. The tax breaks, if we want to talk about them a little, what the legislature did in a sort of midnight deal is one of those, let's try to get Republican votes. It would let businesses pick which formula they use to calculate their taxes, whether it's sort of California sales or national or international. It would let them transfer tax credits to related businesses, so not just one single businesses, but kind of a group. It would also let them deduct losses 1 year off of future year profits. And a lot of these have already gone into effect. Some of them will go into effect next year.
So this is one of those, collectively, there are 2 of those propositions that when I see them, I kind of scratch my head and I think, boy, sometimes I have trouble balancing my own budget. It doesn't add up at the end to 0. And they want me to vote and decide whether, someone else should get a tax break or whether the state should be allowed to take certain money from the cities. Am I qualified to vote on this? Isn't there some blowback on this that, shouldn't this be decided at the state and with experts, so to speak?
And I think if you talk to folks on both sides of these, they'll acknowledge that this is part of the reason that we have some of the budget messes we have, is that you do see this ballot box budgeting where voters carve out, if we ask everybody here, do you want money for kids to go to school? I think we'd all say yes, but we're not looking at the whole picture. And so that is something that opponents of Prop 22, this one that would sort of wall off funding even further for local governments, are saying, they're like, look, we elect these representative officials to represent us and to make these decisions with a big picture in mind. Is it right for us to be going to the ballot box every year, or sometimes multiple times a year, and like you're saying, kind of picking and choosing all these programs? The Prop 24, the tax repeal, that's a little bit of an interesting one because, yes, is this the right place for voters to do this? Do we want initiatives to really be setting tax policy? Maybe not. On the flip side, folks say, well, this was a deal that was struck in the middle of the night. There was really, no hearings on this, not a lot of sort of sunshine into the matter. But I think you make a completely valid point.
Well, I said about the San Francisco ballot, and I guess I could certainly say it about the state proposition ballot, that sometimes you feel as though there is no one home in the halls where power is supposed to be.
And people tend to vote no when they're confused, so don't be almost if we see a lot of these go down.
Yeah. Well, there's no confusion about your story, Matthew. You had a judge here who decided that almost enough's enough. So tell us a little bit about the Don't Ask, Don't Tell declaration of unconstitutionality.
Sure. Well, the lawsuit was filed about 4 years ago by the Log Cabin Republicans and was largely ignored by almost everyone. And nobody really thought much about this lawsuit going forward. And then the judge down in Riverside, Virginia Phillips, kind of shocked everyone and said that the Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy, which bars gay and lesbian service members from declaring openly that they are gay and lesbian, is unconstitutional. And basically, that's a violation of their freedom of speech rights and due privacy rights. So what happened this week is that she actually lifted the stay of her ruling, and as of now, Don't Ask, Don't Tell is not being enforced by the military. Then yesterday, the Department of Justice asked the judge to re-stay her ruling so that it would go back into effect. So while all this is going on, service members who are gay or lesbian are really confused about what they should do. We had one out in Texas try to re-enlist and was turned away. Gay rights groups are warning service members not to come out because it is in flux and no one's really certain if the policy, because it's going to be appealed and probably will make its way to the Supreme Court, if the military can still do this, what happens? No one really knows. And at the same time, you have Congress and the president still trying to figure out how to deal with this legislatively, and it's been kicked into the lame duck session that will happen in late November.
Why did Judge Phillips, it was sort of a surprise to everyone, act in such a way that would say to the entire universe here, this policy is not to be enforced?
Because it's pretty no common sense ruling. I mean, everybody out there is saying that this policy is bad, from the president to congressional leaders to Republicans in Congress. 75% of the country in polling says that they don't want to see this. So I don't think it's a real surprise that this judge was able to look at this and say, this doesn't make any sense. It's hurting these service members. It's hurting the military. The problem is that the military has been given a deadline of December 1st to figure out and study this issue and present to the president how they're going to institute allowing openly gay and lesbian service members in. And the president has said all along he wants that time for the military to figure it out before he just says, you have to do this.
I guess there are some people who might scratch their heads and say, how could one judge in Riverside, California, turn the whole thing over? And, you know, in the past, we've heard all these complaints about quote-unquote activist judges. Are there going to be some people complaining about this judge in Riverside being a quote-unquote activist judge?
Oh, certainly. They already are. I mean, we saw the same thing with Judge Vaughn Walker here with the same-sex marriage case. So I think some of the people who agree with the service members and Log Cabin that this law should be 86th also say that, you know, the Department of Justice should appeal so that it's not just left up to this one judge's ruling, and that it does go to the Ninth Circuit and that it does go to the Supreme Court, where you never know. Yes, the Supreme Court right now is very conservative, but there is a swing vote on there, Justice Kennedy, who has been pretty good in the past on LGBT rights, and he may decide with the liberals that, yeah, we want to get rid of this. So you just don't know. So, but I think no matter what judge does anything, if one side doesn't agree, they're going to call him an activist
Has the
judge.
Obama administration filed for an appeal? Or
yes, they've done both. So the judge is going to rule, or will have a hearing on Monday afternoon at 2:30 down in Riverside on the matter of imposing the stay on her ruling while it waits and goes to the Ninth Circuit.
Thank you so much, Matthew. In fact, thanks to all of you for joining us here tonight. Well, for more coverage of election issues, the ballot propositions, and the candidates, go to kqed.org/thisweek and click on Elections 2010. As part of KQED's Climate Watch project, tonight we have the next in our ongoing series of conversations with thought leaders on the subject of climate change and California. Senior editor Craig Miller talks with Dan Kamen, who has recently been appointed Chief Energy Czar for the World Bank.
Dan, most people in Northern California know you as the director of the Renewable and Appropriate Energy Laboratory at UC Berkeley, a title I've always kind of gotten a kick out of, appropriate energy. May not know that you're also on the IPCC, the UN's group of climate scientists. Now onto the World Bank, and although you'll need an oversized business card for your formal title, most folks are just calling you Clean Energy Czar. What does that really mean? Czar connotes that you might actually have some power in this job.
Well, I hope there's some power. I'm a little worried because many czars haven't ended up too well in the past. But dispensing with that, the title reflects the fact that the World Bank has rapidly ramped up its lending in both renewable energy and energy efficiency. And the programs that it has now are interesting, but they're not pulled together in a coherent program. There aren't strategies, there aren't areas to look at issues of access for the poor, for gender, for climate control. So my job is really to shape that process and to work with partners both within the World Bank and hence the Washington, D.C. community, but governments around the world to really figure out what's working and what's not, and to emphasize those success stories.
So you hope to achieve what specifically? To give them a sort of a roadmap?
I think even more than that, my first task is a roadmap. It feels a bit like my academic job translated with a policy paper. But it's to build a strategy in lending to support clean energy that takes advantage of what's been a really exciting couple years, where new technologies, new patents are just blooming out there. So there's lots of new hardware, but there's also lots of new ideas of how to bring energy to the poorest communities, how to work with emerging companies that might be able to get started, not just, say, in Silicon Valley, but to have startups in solar or wind in Sumatra, in eastern China, in Nicaragua. So it's really to try to build what we sort of take for granted here now, the global clean tech boom that we want to see globally.
I want to come back around to sort of California's leadership role in this, but first, here's a comment from a New York Times post on your very appointment at the World Bank. The person wrote, "I'm overjoyed that a genuine expert like Dan Kammen will have a position like this at the World Bank. What worries me is that his enthusiasm and optimism will be slowly eroded by inertia and bureaucracy." Do you worry about that too?
I think anyone does when you go to a big organization. The World Bank has 6,000 employees. That's very large infrastructure. Many people who come to the bank have been ministers, assistant ministers, vice ministers around the world. So there is a culture of bureaucracy like any big organization. But this is arguably the most interesting time in energy than we've had since the post-Jimmy Carter period of ramping up our research and implementing technologies. So I hope to be on the wave that kind of puts the solar panels on the White House, not on the President Reagan phase that took them off. But globally, it's the right time. There's lots of money, there's lots of need.
And you were on the wave, actually, that accomplished a lot of established California's leadership position, is often the word that's used, in reducing the carbon footprint and developing renewable energy targets here in this state. What can you take from here, from that experience, that you think might work for you globally?
Well, that I think is probably the most fun part, because California has been on the cutting edge of greenhouse gas laws, our law AB 32, on lots of more detailed measures you don't hear about. Standards to have cleaner fuels, standards so the utilities can make money by selling less energy if they provide more services, emphasizing energy efficiency, lots of things that were tried out here because California really does want to make a difference, that are now ready to go. And because the World Bank is not first and foremost a research group, it needs to build on things that have been tried. And California is a great test bed because we're willing to do the research and try. The World Bank can pick the ones that have worked best. And I'm really hoping that what will come out of it will be a dialogue. Developing countries learn from us, we learn from them, and we're able to put the best of those things in place right as they're ramping up their energy use. So they're much cleaner at the start than we were.
Speaking of dialogues and implications beyond California, I have to ask you about Proposition 23. This is the ballot measure that would seek to suspend the state's landmark climate legislation for, what is really an indefinite period. Where do you come down on that?
Well, I'm really disappointed that it's come to having a ballot measure on this, and there's a couple reasons. One is that the letter of Prop 23 says that until the unemployment rate comes back down to 5.5% for 4 consecutive quarters, the greenhouse gas law would be suspended. Well, I hate to break it to the authors of Prop 23, but our high current unemployment rate has nothing to do with our greenhouse gas law. And in fact, the clean tech sector has been one of the fastest growing. In fact, it's outperformed the state average growth substantially. So Prop 23, in my mind, is misguided both in what it's going to do, take away the stability that has helped us to form lots of new clean energy companies. We have Solar Cities and Sungevities and Mia Soleils and NanoSolar and lots of companies out there that took hold in California, hired Californians, and in fact are profit-generating entities in the new clean energy economy. So Prop 23 is a step in the wrong direction, and unfortunately it also sends a very dangerous global signal. It says that stable markets for clean energy might be undermined even in California.
With a minute or so that we have left, we also have a tight governor's race. Does that put California at a sort of crossroads in this whole push toward renewable energy and less greenhouse gas emissions, do you think?
It's going to depend on what the candidates really make of 23.
Well, we've got a Republican candidate who says, regardless of 23, she wants to suspend AB 32 on her first day in office.
Right, and my hope is that whoever wins, that they'll see the light of day, and that because the clean energy sector really has been a job growth engine for the state, it has not been a drain, it's been a positive force, that on purely economic grounds alone, we should keep it in place. And in fact, the biggest thing we know about environmental laws over their history is that they need stability. If you want to bring new players into the market, just to diversify it, to say nothing of cleaning the global atmosphere, you've got to give them time to grow. Cutting off AB 32 would be a huge mistake for that round. So I hope that whoever wins, and I know one of the candidates certainly has that in mind, I'm hoping that the candidate Whitman also will recognize that should she prevail.
Okay. Dan Kamen, thanks for spending some time with us.
Oh, it's really a pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
And that is all the time that we have for this week. Be sure to tune in next Friday night for our 2010 election special. Thank you for watching. I'm Belva Davis. Good night.
Funding for Climate Watch on This Week in Northern California is provided by the Mary Van Voorhees Fund and the Fallis Family Fund.